In a land of tents and wandering flocks, there lived two sisters, one loved, one fertile, one chosen, yet empty. This is not a tale of fairy tale romance. It is the story of Rachel, the beautiful shepherdess whose womb was silent and whose rival was her own sister. She was adored by Jacob, but haunted by Leah's children. She laughed in youth, but wept in silence. From her lips rose the bitter cry, "Give me children, or I die." This is the story of a woman caught between love and longing, favor and frustration, and how heaven heard her sorrow. Welcome to Rachel, the barren wife and rival of her own sister. Subscribe now, because what unfolds is not just a story of a woman, but the birth of a nation.
It was an ordinary day in the land of Haran. The sun glowed over the hills, warm and golden, touching every stone and tent with gentle light. The well outside the town was alive with sound, the bleating of sheep, the voices of shepherds, the creaking of wooden water jars being filled again and again. People hurried about their daily tasks. Nothing seemed unusual, nothing except what heaven had planned. A man appeared on the horizon, dust-covered, sunburnt, and weary from a long journey. His name was Jacob. He had traveled far, fleeing the wrath of his brother Esau, and searching for a bride among his mother's kin. He was tired in body, but even more in soul. Jacob approached the well, and sat beside the great stone that covered its mouth, a stone so large it required several men to roll it away. He waited, quiet, watching the shepherds, catching his breath. And then she came, Rachel, a young shepherdess, guiding her father's flock across the field. She moved with confidence, grace, and purpose, her light blue robe dancing in the breeze, her dark braided hair peeking from beneath a white veil. Her face was bright, sun-kissed, and full of life. Jacob looked up, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. He had never seen beauty like this. Not just the kind that pleases the eyes, but the kind that touches the heart. Rachel seemed like something sent from heaven itself. Jacob stood, as if moved by a force greater than himself, and before anyone could speak, he walked straight to the stone covering the well, and rolled it away, alone, with strength born not from muscles, but from awe, purpose, and maybe something divine. He drew water and offered it to her flock, not as a servant, but as one offering honor. Rachel's eyes met his. They were kind, curious, and surprised. "Who are you?" her gaze seemed to ask. Jacob took a breath and spoke. "I am Jacob, son of Isaac, your cousin." And then something broke inside him. Tears rose to his eyes. Tears of exhaustion, relief, wonder, and perhaps the first stirrings of love. He had found her. He hadn't even known he was looking, but his soul recognized her. Rachel stood still, moved but unsure. Then, suddenly, she turned and ran toward home, toward her father, Laban, to tell him the stranger at the well was family. And so began the story. A love that would wait 7 years. A marriage tangled in rivalry. A journey that would stretch both joy and pain. But in this moment, under the wide sky and the watchful eye of God, Jacob had seen Rachel, and Rachel had seen Jacob. The sheep drank quietly. The well whispered its secret, and heaven smiled, because sometimes love doesn't arrive with trumpets or songs. It comes in dusty robes, in thirsty flocks, and in the silence between two hearts that recognize one another. This was only the beginning. When Rachel ran to her father's tent to tell him of Jacob's arrival, Laban's eyes lit up. He remembered Rebekah, his sister, and how she had been taken far away to marry Isaac. And now her son had come, dusty, weary, alone, yet filled with promise. Laban rushed to meet Jacob and embraced him with the warmth of kin. He brought him into his tent, gave him food and rest, and listened to every word Jacob had to tell. Days turned into weeks. Jacob began to work among Laban's flocks, helping, serving, learning. But it was not Laban's livestock that drew Jacob's eyes. It was Rachel. She was a younger daughter, the shepherdess who had stirred something deep in him at the well. Every morning, Jacob would rise early to see her lead her flock. Every evening, he would find ways to help her with the animals. They laughed. They walked under the stars. But never crossed a line of honor. Jacob was patient, but his heart had already made a vow. One day, Jacob approached Laban. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with love. "I will work for you," he said, "for 7 years if you give me Rachel as my wife." Laban paused. He saw the eagerness in Jacob's eyes and the opportunity in front of him. "It is better," he said, "that I give her to you than to another man. Stay with me." The deal was struck. 7 years. 7 years of sweat, sun, and labor. 7 years of folding tents, chasing sheep, and serving a man who would later prove to be more cunning than kind. But for Jacob, it passed like days. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, says the scripture, and they seemed but a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Each sunrise was another step closer to her. Each call of the sheep echoed the name of the woman he loved. And Rachel, she waited too. Though silent in the record, her heart was watching. Perhaps she counted the years. Perhaps she whispered prayers at night. But in her eyes, there was a knowing. Love was growing, not in haste, but in endurance. And all of heaven watched. For this was not just a story of two people, but the unfolding of a lineage that would shape nations. But Laban, he was not a man of clean deals. In his heart stirred deception. And the wedding that should have been a celebration of pure love would soon become a battlefield of jealousy, betrayal, and rivalry. But for now, in the 7th year, Jacob smiled. He had labored, he had loved, and he was ready to take Rachel as his bride. The 7 years passed. For most, it would have felt like a lifetime. But for Jacob, they were as fleeting as morning dew. Every sunrise brought him one step closer to her, to Rachel, the one his soul loved. And finally, the day came. He stood before Laban and said, "Give me my wife. My time is completed." Laban nodded, but his heart was divided, for Rachel was younger, more favored. But Leah, the elder daughter, gentle, quiet, and often overlooked, still remained unmarried. In secret, Laban devised a plan, a deception wrapped in tradition. The tents were prepared. A great feast was announced. The air was filled with celebration. Torches lit the night. Music and dancing echoed through the camp. And Jacob, his heart overflowed. He was finally going to marry Rachel, the one he loved, the one he had worked for, waited for. But as night fell, as customs demanded, his bride was veiled, hidden behind layers of cloth in silence. And when the guests had departed, and the wine had made his eyes heavy, Jacob brought his bride into the marriage tent. The darkness swallowed the truth. No words were spoken, no suspicions raised. And the night passed. But when the sun rose, and golden light spilled through the tent flaps, Jacob turned and saw Leah, not Rachel, not the one he loved, but her sister. The shock, the confusion, the betrayal. His voice broke with disbelief. "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban, calm and composed, replied, "It is not our custom to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete this week with Leah, and I will give you Rachel also, if you serve me another 7 years. Another 7. 7 more years of labor for what was already promised." Jacob stood in silence, his heart torn. Rachel, the love of his life, was still not his. And now, Leah, the one he had never chosen, had become his wife. In the shadows of that deception, jealousy was born, wounds were sown, and Rachel, the one Jacob loved, would now become not only a bride, but a rival. 2 sisters, 1 man, and a storm of pain waiting to break. This was not how love was supposed to begin, not with trickery, not with rivalry. But even here, in the mess of human schemes, God was watching. For he does not only write stories through victories, but through wounds. The wedding celebrations had ended, but the joy was fractured. Jacob now had 2 wives, 2 sisters, but only one heart. He loved Rachel, the one he had worked 14 years for, the one his soul longed for at first sight. She was a desire of his heart, but she was childless. Leah, the one he never chose, the one he had been tricked into marrying, was fruitful. The scripture says it plainly. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And with every passing season, Leah gave birth to sons, Reuben, then Simeon, then Levi, then Judah. Each time, her eyes would search Jacob's face, hoping a son might win his love. But though Jacob honored her, his heart remained with Rachel, and Rachel watched it all, silent at first. But soon her silence turned to sorrow, and her sorrow to envy. She was the loved wife, yet empty. She had Jacob's heart, but not his children. Her cries in the night were unseen. Her pain could not be comforted. And one day, her heart broke open. She turned to Jacob, her voice desperate. "Give me children or I die." Jacob, shaken, answered with frustration, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Pain collided with pain, and in that moment, a war between sisters became a war of wounds. Rachel, desperate to compete, gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a surrogate. Bilhah bore a son, Dan, then another, Naphtali. Rachel declared, "With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed." But Leah, seeing her rival rise, joined the battle again. She gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob. Zilpah bore 2 sons, Gad and Asher. The tents of Jacob were filled with sons. But peace was nowhere to be found. This was not love. It was survival, a war of favor, a game of legacy. The children played in the fields, each one a reminder to Rachel of what she did not have. And though Jacob loved her, nothing could soothe her emptiness. She lived in a home full of children, but none were her own. And still, in the silence of Rachel's tent, God listened, for though her womb was closed, her prayers were not. Heaven had not forgotten her, and in time, a miracle would awaken. But for now, the sisters lived as rivals. 2 women under one roof, one with children, one with love, both broken, both desperate. This was not how family was meant to be, but from these broken branches would grow the tree of Israel. The years passed. Children's laughter echoed through Jacob's tents, sons growing stronger, herds growing larger. But Rachel's tent remained silent. She was a loved wife, but the one without children, and each passing year carved a deeper ache in her heart. Leah had many sons. The maidservants had given sons too, but Rachel still waited, still watched, still wept. Her heart had learned to pray in silence, to smile in public, to bury her longing where no one could see. She had fought, she had wrestled, she had tried everything, but now she simply waited. And then the scripture says, "And God remembered Rachel." Not that he had forgotten, but that the fullness of time had come. The heavens had always heard her, but now they answered. She conceived, and in her womb grew the promise she had dreamed of. When the child was born, Rachel held him in trembling arms. A tiny face, a new beginning. She named him Joseph, meaning, may he add, God has taken away my disgrace. She whispered, may he add to me another son. It wasn't just a baby. It was redemption. It was proof that even in long silence, God does not forget. Joseph would one day become a ruler in Egypt. He would save nations. But on this day, he was simply a child of answered prayer, a gift of grace. Jacob rejoiced, his heart full. Rachel was no longer empty, and for a time, peace settled in the tents. But it was not the end. It was only the beginning, because even when the womb opens, a deeper story still unfolds. The journey ahead will be marked by both joy and tragedy. And Rachel, the woman who waited so long for life, would one day weep for loss. But today, she smiled. She held Joseph close to her chest, and the world faded away. For once, the rivalry, the shame, the silence were all washed away in the cries of a newborn. God had remembered Rachel, and the legacy of Israel would never be the same. Time passed, and the camp of Jacob was no longer a wandering band of tents, but the beginnings of a nation. 12 sons now played in the fields. The land teemed with cattle, sheep, and blessing. But Jacob could not remain in Haran forever. He had served Laban for 20 years. Now God called him back to the land of his fathers, back to Canaan. And so he gathered his wives, his children, his flocks, and began the journey home. Among the caravan rode Rachel, no longer the shepherdess by the well, but now the honored wife, the mother of Joseph, and she was with child again. God had remembered her once, and now he had blessed her again. But the journey was long, and the road to promise often passes through pain. They traveled south through the rocky hills of Gilead, moving slowly with animals and children. The sun beat down. The terrain was rough. Then, somewhere near Bethlehem, Rachel cried out. Labor had begun, but this time, something was wrong. Her cries grew louder. The women gathered. The midwives rushed. Jacob stood outside the tent, pacing, praying, afraid. Inside, Rachel fought to give life, but her body was failing. Her breath grew shallow. And finally, a baby's cry pierced the night. A son, her second, her last. With trembling lips, Rachel named him Benoni, son of my sorrow. But Jacob, full of grief, called him Benjamin, son of my right hand. And as the sun set over the hills of Canaan, Rachel breathed her last. She died, giving life, not in bitterness, but in broken beauty. She had waited so long to bear children. Now she had given all she had. The caravan paused. The journey halted. Jacob buried her there on the way to Bethlehem, not in a family tomb, not in a place of honor, but beside the road, a simple grave, marked by a pillar. And there Jacob wept. The scripture says. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath. And Jacob set a pillar on her grave. It is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. She was the love of his youth, the one he labored for, the one who captured his soul by a well. Now she rested by the road, gone but not forgotten. Rachel, the barren wife, the rival, the beloved, the mother of nations. Her story ends not in defeat, but in legacy, because from her sons, Joseph and Benjamin, would rise leaders, prophets, kings, and generations later, in a town near her tomb, another woman would give birth to another son, one who would save the world. And Rachel, whose heart once broke for her children, would be remembered in prophecy. A voice is heard in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children. Her name lives on, not in rivalry, but in redemption.